Hello, hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be discussing my fusion plan for getting Kro'khad The Throatripper. I think that's how you say it, but he is the latest fragment summon champion in the game, and boy, is he pretty darn dope from what I have seen. But yes, the Hound that we've been promised for over a year, the Packmaster Shy'Ek fusion, of course, was last July, for those who don't recall, or if you weren't playing back then. But way back then, we were promised that there were more Hounds on the way. Fast forward a year later, and we finally have a useful Hound that pairs excellently with him. Unfortunately, without him, he's probably not going to be that strong of a champion. We'll kind of talk about that as we go through the abilities. But nonetheless, if you do have him like I do, this could be a really, really solid champion for you. So let's go through the kit first of all and talk about whether or not this champion is worth your while. First off, I want to point you guys to the base stats here. On the attack, 1700 base attack. So he has one of the highest base attacks in the game. Not the highest, but still he's higher than your average legendary. And the trade-off there, of course, is that his defense is abysmally low, but you know, he's not really meant to tank damage. He's meant to deal damage, as we'll see. Speed is pretty average, 100, and then he has the bonus of the crit damage because he is definitely a nuker. So going through the kit itself, on the A1, it's an AoE attack, which is great, but it deals damage to each target individually. So think of this like Thor's AoE ability. So it's the same thing where it attacks each head individually, thus it does not effectively count as an AoE, therefore it is strong against Hydra heads, for example. On the A2, another AoE attack, this time a normal AoE attack, but will place an extra hit on enemies under 2 or more debuffs, and wouldn't you know that he provides 2 debuffs of his own. So as long as he lands his 2, or there's already 2 out there, this will be a double hitter. And as you may know, extra hits are somewhat special because they don't have the same AoE damage restrictions, because you're placing an extra hit on each enemy that meets the condition. Therefore, it is not effectively an AoE, because some champions might only have 1 debuff, for example. So keep that in mind as well. And these debuffs cannot be resisted if Packmaster Shy'Ek is on the same team, meaning that you effectively won't need any accuracy in his kit at all whatsoever if you run the tandem together. 3-turn cooldown on this ability. Then lastly, we have the A3, attacks one enemy, but it will ignore 50% of the target's defense, as well as life barrier and poison cloud, as well as effects that redirect attacks, damage, or debuffs, meaning that he can basically ignore the head of mischief on his own. And then he will repeat this attack once if Packmaster Shy'Ek is on the same team. So you're seeing a lot of synergy with Packmaster. So double hit here, or double damage here, and then the irresistible debuffs on the A2. So without Packmaster Shy'Ek, this is only going to be a single target hitter, but it's still going to ignore everything it ignores. This, you just need accuracy in the kit. You'll still get the extra hits if you land 2 debuffs. And this, it will just deal normal damage instead of double damage when counterattacking. Then lastly here, we have the passive, which is another damage scaling champion. So it will increase its attack by 5% when killing an enemy or decapitating a Hydra head, stacks up to 25%, but it will increase it by 10% instead, up to 50% if Packmaster is on the same team. So again, doubling your damage potential if you have the tandem together. And then it will instantly activate Dominant Predator, which is the A3 skill against a Hydra head when an ally is devoured by the head if Packmaster Shy'Ek is on the same team. So again, you generally speaking want to run them together. It's not that he's useless without it, but he's a lot more powerful with him on the team, especially this caveat here, which does not have a cooldown. So essentially, as long as you don't have a weak hit, a bad affinity matchup, you're practically guaranteed to free a champion instantly as soon as they're devoured, assuming the champion devoured is not him, of course. Because remember that is activating this ability here, which when Packmaster is on the same team, which of course you would require to have this aspect of the passive activate, this will be a double hitter that ignores 50% of the target's defense. So that's going to be a massive, massive amount of damage. And if you get in that situation where your champion gets devoured, then Poison Cloud goes out or Life Barrier goes up, he will ignore both of those and still be able to free your champion. So yeah, this guy is an absolute beast, literally and figuratively. You can definitely see that he's kind of catered or tuned towards Hydra, you know, ignoring a bunch of the buffs that are exclusive, relatively exclusive to Hydra. You know, you have good debuffs for Hydra Leech in the weekend. You compare that with someone who just has decreased defense. And then, of course, ignoring, you know, reflect damage that the Head of Suffering puts out, Pain Link, and all that type of stuff. Ally Protection also from the Head of Suffering. And then, of course, having damage scaling stuff that depends on getting kills, or decapitating Hydra Hydra heads. So again, synergizes extremely well within a Hydra context, but also he has some prowess, some potential in Chimera, because like we talked about, you can turn off his other abilities on the Ram form and just spam the A1, and thus you will not don't have to worry about having fear out on your team necessarily. But also for the trials, you do have the leech there, and you just have a good damage dealer. However, his damage won't scale in Chimera because of course you can't kill enemies or decapitate a Hydra head because it's Chimera. Now for a quick preview of Packmaster Shy'Ek, let me just highlight the main points that are going to synergize well with Kro'khad. So on the A1 here, he just attacks when enemy places decreased defense, but any beasts on the team, any hounds on the team will join up and use their default skills. So this is again a free AoE activation of Kro'khad here every time that Packmaster uses his A1. On the A2, he cleanses himself, places a heal on himself, and then places a shield and taunt to reflect damage. Essentially, these buffs are protected if you have any hound on the team, so that's useful for Shy'Ek, less so for Kro'khad. And then lastly here, we have a turn meter fill with the 100% chance to place block buffs, and you cannot resist block buffs if at least one debuff or one beast is on the team. And then on the passive here, as I mentioned, when this champion is attacked, all hounds will counterattack, including Kro'khad, and thus his A1 is going to be doing a lot of damage, specifically when counterattacking, it deals double damage. And then of course Hex here, the synergy there is that of course Hex is good for the head of Mischief. He's definitely going to be the Mischief tank because one for taunt, but also just because he's going to put a lot of buffs on himself that are protected, which is synergizes nice with that as well. But also any allies on the team will deal 20% more damage for Hex that are placed by this champion. So you can put him in Cursed, you can use his passive to place Hex out there, kind of mix and match depending on how you want to play it. But again, the synergy is triggering the counterattacks, which is free damage from Kro'khad, and then the ally attack here whenever he uses A1. So yeah, if you have the opportunity, I do highly recommend you try and go for this guy if you can. Even if you don't have Packmaster Shy'Ek, they have advertised through the news bulletins and whatnot that there will be an opportunity to get Packmaster Shy'Ek. We don't exactly know what the form that is. It could be a Hero's Path, could be relatively expensive in terms of soul stones and or shards, could be a deck of fate. We don't really know, but the idea is that potentially you might be able to get the duo, so it would probably be in your best interest to at least bank the fusion just in case you happen to get a Packmaster later on in the future, if that's something you're more interested in. And in terms of damage, what I've seen from other CCs is that he's relatively speaking on par with the likes of Thor, which means he's someone on par with the likes of Tholen and other such champions that we've seen have a little bit of damage scaling. But what I've not yet seen is a kind of comparison between him and a Packmaster versus like a Ninja Mikage. I think there could be potentially in the same conversation in terms of damage, albeit that Kro'khad brings a little bit more utility for the team with the leech and the weaken, so you have a little bit more sustain and potentially more damage depending on who you have for decreased defense, versus a Ninja who brings a lot of damage and a little bit of burn, and then a kind of weak AoE form of decreased defense depending on where his attacks go, his A1s go, and where Mikage's A1s go. So assuming that you are interested in getting this champion, let's hop over to the Fusion Plan spreadsheet, which will be linked in the description box down below if you'd like to look at a copy of this for yourself. This is a large catalog of fusions dating all the way back through Python, and it highlights a lot of the events or the milestones for each of the events and tournaments. And so we have the full calendar here, and this fusion is pretty darn straightforward. There's no like special gimmick or anything going on, which is kind of nice for a change, but we'll talk about predictions as far as what events are to come. But we have the standard 4 dungeon split, no event dungeon this time around. That happened for the first time during Titus, but I anticipate that that's going to be a kind of a rare occurrence, especially since that's a perennial dungeon. We have classic arena tournaments, 2 of them. We have a champion training tournament. We have a champion chase, of course, near the end of the fusion. We have 3 dungeon divers, 3 art of gear enhancement. We have a champion training event going on right now, and then we have a summon rush that starts in a few days. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is a fragment summon, meaning that you do have to collect at least 100 fragments to claim the champion in the end, and up for grabs, at least for outside of winning tournaments, which is probably not going to happen for majority of you guys, myself included. There are 110 fragments up for grabs, meaning that you can overshoot a little bit and plug and play depending on how you want to play it. My expectation is that the champion chase is going to overlap with 2x voids. We just had 2x ancients this past weekend, and then I think 2x sacreds was the one prior to that. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I believe we should be up for 2x voids. So just keep that in mind. Hopefully you have 30 to 40-ish voids. If that's roughly around on average what you would need to get the amount of points from the champion chase. Of course, it depends where the milestone milestone is. And I guess that's a good segue here to talk about the milestones here over on the right-hand side. For those who don't know the layout of the spreadsheet, anything marked here with an asterisk means it's a predicted value based off historical precedent. It's informed by previous fusions, more or less. And then also anything that's in parentheses is going to be highlighting the supplies that I happen to have used for myself in these particular fusions. So if we look at Titus, you can see that I did a shardless champion chase. I used 6 sacreds for the first summon rush, and I didn't do anything for the second summon rush. So that's just kind of highlighting. You can look at this as a reference for what I did, being endgame free to play, or you can kind of compare it to what I did to what you're doing or what your strategy is. So the main thing I want to draw your attention to is the summoning events, because typically that's where people splurge a little bit more to go invest more resources into those. Therefore, they can skip other events. Like I mentioned, you have 10 fragments of wiggle room, so to speak, to skip some events. So the champion chases should be easier in this case because the milestone's typically 2,500, 3,000 for the upper milestone. So we'll see if that comes to pass. This is my prediction for the summon rush. You're going to have a lower node at around 2,350, 2,250, somewhere around there, and the upper milestone is going to be around 3,200. Could be wrong, could be underestimated, could be overestimated. We'll have to see once it goes live. But one thing I'll point out here for my particular strategy is I'm in Sacred Mercy at the moment. So normally I would say, this would be 6 sacreds plus some mystery shards. But since I am in Mercy, I'm saving my Mercy for a potential sacred pogo in the near term. That's not been announced, but I expect there's going to be one within the next month or so, perhaps after the fusion. But regardless, I'm trying to save that so I can get 2 legendaries for the price of 1. So I'm going to probably pull some voids here. And depending on how expensive this is and how expensive the champion chase is, I might, reduce overall the number of voids just because I'd be doubling up on voids. So we'll have to see. That's why there's a TBD here to decide if I have fragment summons, if I have remnant summons to use. Well, I definitely have remnant summons to use. But if I want to do remnant summons, do a shardless thing again. So TBD, stay tuned for that one. And the final thing to mention here is that along the bottom, you can see what I've outlined here is my energy plan, which is how I plan to spend my energy throughout the fusion. This is not necessarily a guide for how to spend your energy, just summarizing how I plan to spend my energy. And one of the things I always like to highlight here are what I call pinch points, which is the overlap between champion training as well as a dungeon tournament, because it's a potential squeeze on your resources, specifically energy. So we start off with an overlapping of champion training and dragon, and then later on in the fusion, we have a spider overlapping with the entirety of the champion training tournament. So popping back into the game, let's talk about some of the current events going on in the game and a little bit of my strategy when it comes to starting off with this fusion. But as usual, let's kick things off with my overall supply count, because I do like to summarize how my supplies have changed, namely gems and silver. And at the end of the fusion, I will post on my community tab page a summary of the deltas in terms of shards, gems, and silver, what changed over the course of the fusion, because a lot of people do have the perspective that you cannot do every single fusion, and I've done every single fusion basically since I started playing a few months after I started playing. And it most certainly is possible, but it does require you to be somewhat meticulous with your resources and relatively more conservative with your resources. So I'm benchmarking the beginning of the fusion at around 5,000 on the gems, and it's actually 209 on the 209 million on the silver. 218 is because I did a little bit of forging, because of course CVC is live and it's a PR CVC, which is typically when I do my forging in the forge. So I still have more to go from that one, but I do expect that my silver losses over the course of the fusion aren't going to be as bad, because I will have a decent influx of silver from forging. So diving into the events that are already live, I mentioned the dragon tournament, so that is going on right now. I did wait until today began to do it because Dungeon Divers started a day later, so there was a little bit of a delay between starting those events just for the sake of efficiency. As you can see, I've done a little bit of dragon this morning, and I didn't do any of it last night. Last night I just used my basic energy on champion training and waited until today to kind of go harder on the champion training. And so champion training combined with dragon should also help me complete the Dungeon Divers in a timely fashion. We'll kind of see how that works out, but if need be, of course, I will spend gems to make sure I get all the way out to the 3,700. As far as the overall fusion, my plan typically is that I maximize the champion chase, minimize the summon rush, and then I just get to 100 fragments. But I also have been embarking somewhat recently on what I'm calling mysteries for Maud, and so that means that I'll go for the lower milestone in terms of higher powered shards, in this case probably voids, and then the remainder to get to the upper milestone I will get in mystery shards. So I won't be skipping any events, I'll be doing all events, but a little bit excess, but I'm going to be doing the excess in the summon rush with mystery shards, because as you can see here, I have nearly 17,000, and it's a lot faster to kind of bulk open and bulk feed the champions you get from them, so it's not as untenable as it used to be to crank through 2,000 or so mystery shards. And then, as I hinted at before, I do have 10 remnant summons currently at this moment, so if I really wanted to kind of min-max the champion chase, chase, I can use this for, you know, at minimum 2,500 points, which could be the entirety of the champion chase. We'll kind of see. So that's why there's a little bit of a TBD. It kind of depends what happens with the summon rush. So yeah, that's going to do it for the fusion plan for Kro'khad the Throatripper. Let me know your thoughts on him in the comment section down below. Now, personally, I don't immediately plan to use him despite everything that I've talked about. I have a pretty set Hydra teams at this point, but he is a very, very interesting champion. If you missed out on Ninja one of the 2 times, this is a great alternative, I would think, with Packmaster Shy'Ek, of course, on the team, or just having some flexibility in whoever your DPS is, or if you're lacking DPS, this is a great option to kind of help you break into potentially higher levels of Hydra. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the champion? Are you going for him? And do you already have Packmaster Shy'Ek, or are you hoping that he will be somewhat accessible in whatever future event they promised he will be a part of? As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. Really does help out the channel. And feel free to hit the subscribe button down below as well if you are enjoying the content overall on this channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.